Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's Explainer. I gotta tell you, I am absolutely thrilled about this one because we are embarking on a really fascinating journey. We're gonna start with some deep, foundational literary analysis, and then we're going to escalate all the way into the brilliant, chaotic world of cinematic adaptation. Have you ever read a book, completely loved it, and then watched the movie and thought, wow, that feels entirely different? Well, today, we're going to decode exactly why that happens, and we'll visualize every single step of this transformation.
Okay, let's just dive right into this riddle. How on earth do you translate a semicolon into a camera movement? I mean, it sounds almost impossible, right? But this is actually the core tension of adapting text to the screen. A brilliant author uses punctuation, metaphors, and syntax to make you feel something. But a film director? They don't have a page. They have lenses, lighting, blocking, and music. So how do they bridge that massive gap? That is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, symbols of the Jazz Age. Second, capitalism and the American dream. Third, Gatsby modern to postmodern. And finally, translating Austen to screen.
All right, part one, symbols of the Jazz Age. Taking a really close look at the surface-level text, it's pretty clear Fitzgerald didn't just write a story. He painted a literal, symbolic landscape. We have three massive visual anchors in the novel. First up, the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. This represents Gatsby's yearning, his hope, and frankly, the elusive nature of his desires. Then you have the Valley of Ashes. It's this desolate, industrial wasteland sitting right between the glittering wealth of Long Island and New York City. It perfectly captures the moral desolation and the invisible working class that the wealthy just kind of glide past. And finally, looming over that entire wasteland, the giant billboard eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. They act as this haunting, silent observer, a powerful symbol of a commercialized society where divine moral authority has just been replaced by the empty, vacant stare of an advertisement.
Now, what's really crucial here is how these symbols kind of zoom out to represent all of us. Consider this incredibly famous concluding line from the novel. The green light? It isn't just about Gatsby wanting Daisy anymore. Fitzgerald transforms it into a universal condition. It represents humanity's eternal, almost tragic pursuit of this idealized future that always manages to stay just one step out of our grasp. Moving right along to section 2, capitalism and the American dream. So let's escalate our analysis a bit and peel back a layer. To do this, we're relying on an academic framework known as Western Marxist criticism, which was heavily influenced by the theorist George Lukács. As you can see, this framework basically argues that literature isn't just a copy of real life, it is dynamically critiquing it. So when we apply the specific lens to Gatsby, we aren't looking at Gatsby's death as just bad luck or some personal romantic tragedy. Instead, this lens neutrally analyzes his fall as the inevitable, unavoidable result of a highly commercialized, alienated capitalist society in the 1920s. Now, what's really interesting about this is how clearly the text contrasts the myth with the reality. Just look at the left column. We have the idealized American dream, right? The belief that hard work brings wealth, upward mobility, and ultimately true love. But then look at the reality presented in the text on the right. Gatsby's wealth, it's entirely bootlegged. His relationships are completely commodified. Daisy's essentially bought and sold based on social status. The pursuit of the dream actually destroys the moral values needed to sustain it. The literary theory argues that the system itself was the tragedy, and Gatsby was just caught in the gears. Which brings us to section 3, Gatsby, from modern to postmodern. Let's shift our focus from what the text means to the actual medium itself and look at the artistic movements they belong to. How do you adapt a text that is just so intrinsically tied to its era? Well, Fitzgerald's novel is a product of modernism. It features a fragmented self. Think about how characters are often described just by a single gesture or a voice. And it uses experimental language to break away from traditional Victorian molds. But Baz Luhrmann's 2013 film adaptation? That is pure postmodernism. Postmodern art absolutely loves metafiction, parody, and mashing up the past with the present just to see what kind of sparks fly. Drawing our analysis directly from academic literature here, the author makes a brilliant point. Luhrmann doesn't just adapt the book, he totally reappropriates it. He blends the past and the future to create a piece of metafiction. Basically, it's an adaptation that knows it's an adaptation, and it playfully messes with the audience's expectations of what a typical 1920s period piece should actually look and feel like.
So let's walk through exactly how Luhrmann achieves this wild postmodern collapse of time. First up, metafiction. The film actually adds a framing device where Nick Carraway is literally writing the book we are reading, sitting in a sanitarium. Next, the music. Oh, this is a huge one. He takes 1920s jazz and aggressively layers it with contemporary hip-hop and pop. And he's visually doing the exact same thing with the camera. He mixes old-school black and white montage techniques with hyper-modern digital dolly zooms. And finally, Gatsby himself is treated completely differently. He's not just your standard romantic hero, he's almost satirized. He's portrayed as this over-the-top, slightly ridiculous figure of excess. Luhrmann is showing us, rather than telling us, the chaotic, dizzying energy of the era.
All right, final section, part 4, translating Austen to screen.
For our final case study, we are transitioning to another absolute titan of literature, Jane Austen, and the 2005 cinematic adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. This academic approach reminds us of Austen's highly specific textual toolkit. Austen wrote social comedies of manners. She relied heavily on free indirect speech, strategic dashes, and the balancing weight of a semicolon to show, rather than explicitly state, the deep emotional tension and strict social decorum between her characters. Which brings us right back to that opening question, how on earth does a director visualize a semicolon?
Director Joe Wright actually answers this through pure camera choreography during the famous Netherfield ball scene. Let's break this down chronologically. First, he uses a really dizzying 360-degree camera spin around Elizabeth Bennet. Boom! It instantly establishes her subjective, completely overwhelmed perspective. Next, instead of writing long paragraphs about social dynamics, Wright uses a massive tracking shot, following characters from room to room, physically mapping out the complex social web of the party. And finally, when Elizabeth and Darcy dance, the camera deliberately breaks the 180-degree rule, which is a huge, fundamental rule of filmmaking. The camera crosses the axis of action, making the viewer feel physically disoriented and tense. It perfectly mirrors the volatile, intimate chemistry between the two characters, and they don't even have to say a word.
And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental difference between the two mediums. Austen's novel, it tests mutual chemistry through rationality, really rigid social decorum, and incredibly precise, sharp dialogue. Joe Wright's film, however, strips away a lot of that textual decorum and replaces it with a sweeping, highly emotional audiovisual experience. He uses the lighting, sweeping camera movements, and swelling music to make you actually feel the romantic tension that Austen so meticulously built through punctuation and prose. Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. When a director has to actually translate a semicolon into a tracking shot, or totally update modernism into postmodernism using a hip-hop soundtrack, are they even still telling the same story? Can an adaptation ever truly capture the absolute essence of a novel? Or the second it hits the silver screen, is it destined to become an entirely new, entirely different work of art? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that the next time you head out to the movies. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and keep asking those great questions.